Imagine a time far, far in the distant past. A time before our time, before our maps. A time when the world was a different place and the seas held secrets we can only dream of now. Imagine, if you will, the vast, shimmering expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. A world of endless blue, a world of deep, silent waters. It is in this ocean, west of the Pillars of Heracles, in the time before the Great Flood, that the story of a legendary island kingdom begins to unfold. This island was known as Atlantis, a name that whispers of a lost grandeur, a name that carries the weight of a profound and enduring mystery. The story of Atlantis is not a simple tale of a place, but a story of a people, of their rise and their fall, of their virtues and their ultimate corruption. It is a story that has been handed down through the ages, a story that was first told to us by the great philosopher Plato, who heard it from the Egyptian priests of Sais, a story that speaks of an ancient, forgotten world. The creation of Atlantis was a divine act, a gift from the great god Poseidon, the mighty ruler of the seas, a god who saw in this island a perfect canvas for his vision of a perfect world. Poseidon, the master of the deep, fell in love with a mortal woman on this island, a woman named Cleo, and to protect her and to create a home for her and for the children they would have together, he set about to design a place of unparalleled beauty and security. He did not build with mere human hands, but with the very essence of the sea and the earth, with the power of the gods. He carved the island from the very core of the ocean, a process that was slow and deliberate, a process that was filled with a quiet, divine energy. He created a series of concentric circles around the hill where Cleto lived, a pattern of alternating rings of land and water, a design that was both a fortress and a work of art. There were 3 rings of water and 2 rings of land, and they were all connected to the sea by a single, wide canal that Poseidon himself carved with his immense power. The canal was straight and long, a wide channel that allowed ships to pass from the open ocean directly into the innermost city, to the very heart of the kingdom. The rings of land and water were separated by walls of stone, walls that were meticulously crafted and covered with a plaster that shimmered with a quiet, otherworldly light. The innermost wall was covered with orichalcum, a rare and precious metal, a metal that was said to glow with a gentle, fiery light, a metal that was of profound value in the Atlantean world. The next wall was covered in tin, and the outermost wall was covered in brass, and all 3 of them shone in the sunlight with a quiet, brilliant radiance, a testament to the divine origin of the city. The island itself was a land of profound abundance, a place of deep, fertile soil, a land that was watered by a great, central spring of both hot and cold water. This spring, a gift from the gods, flowed with a constant, gentle pressure, feeding the canals and the gardens, nourishing the land and the people. The land was so fertile that it produced 2 harvests a year, a bounty that was a source of great wealth and comfort for the people of Atlantis. The island was also rich in minerals and stones, and the builders used these materials to construct the great temples and palaces of the city. The buildings were grand and elegant, with columns of white, black, and red stone, a harmonious blend of natural colors and divine design. The central city was a marvel of engineering and artistry, with its perfect concentric circles, its flowing canals, its shining walls, and its magnificent palaces and temples. At the very center of the innermost circle, on the hill where Cleto had once lived, stood the royal Acropolis. This was the most sacred and important part of the city, a place where the temples and the royal residence were located. The great temple of Poseidon stood here, a massive structure of stone, with a roof made of orichalcum that shimmered in the sun like fire. Inside, a statue of Poseidon, riding a chariot pulled by 6 winged horses, stood in a place of honor, a statue so large that it reached the very ceiling of the great temple. The entire island was a work of art, a perfect harmony of nature and divine intervention, a place where a new civilization could be born, a place where the children of a god could live in peace and prosperity. Poseidon and Cleto had 10 children, 5 pairs of twin boys, and Poseidon divided the island among them, making each of them a ruler, a king in his own right. The eldest of the twins, a boy named Atlas, was made the ruler of the entire island, and the great ocean that surrounded it was named the Atlantic Ocean in his honor. The other 9 kings ruled over the various parts of the island, and their kingdoms were all in harmony with one another, all working together for the greater good of the people. They ruled with wisdom and justice, for they were the sons of a god, and they were filled with the virtues of their divine father. The early days of Atlantis were a time of peace and abundance, a time of profound innocence, a time when the people lived in harmony with the natural world and with one another. The city was a place of quiet beauty, with its flowing canals, its grand architecture, and its shining walls. The sound of water was a constant presence, a gentle lullaby that soothed the senses and calmed the mind. The air was clean and fresh, filled with the scents of the fertile soil and the blooming flowers. The people worked together, building a society that was based on mutual respect and shared prosperity. This was the dawn of a new civilization, a civilization that was born of a god and was destined for greatness, a civilization that would one day challenge the very fabric of the world, a civilization that would one day be lost to the depths of the sea. Our quiet journey now takes us to the very heart of the Atlantean civilization, to its architectural and technological marvels, to the very substance that made their world so unique and so wondrous. This substance was orichalcum, a metal that was more precious than gold, a metal that was said to glow with a gentle, fiery light, a metal that was a gift from the very core of the earth. The Atlanteans had a deep and abiding connection to this mysterious metal. It was not just a resource, it was a sacred substance, a symbol of their divine heritage, a material that was used to adorn their most sacred spaces and to power their most advanced technologies. The mines that produced orichalcum were a source of great wealth, and the miners worked with a deep respect for the earth, always giving back what they took, always treating the land with a sense of sacred reverence. They understood that the orichalcum was a gift, not a right, and they used it with a sense of purpose and a profound gratitude. The royal Acropolis, the very heart of the city, was a shining testament to the power and beauty of orichalcum. The central temple of Poseidon, a massive and magnificent structure, was covered in this glowing metal. The roof was a single, vast expanse of orichalcum, a roof that shimmered and glowed in the sunlight, a roof that seemed to be on fire with a quiet, otherworldly light. The effect was breathtaking, a sight that would have inspired awe and wonder in anyone who saw it. The interior of the temple was equally magnificent. The statue of Poseidon, so large that it reached the very ceiling of the great temple, was made of pure gold, but it was surrounded by carvings and friezes that were inlaid with orichalcum, a brilliant contrast of shining gold and glowing fire. The floor of the temple was also adorned with orichalcum, a vast, intricate pattern of glowing lines that guided the priests and the people in their sacred rituals. The concentric walls of the city were also a wonder of engineering and artistry, a testament to the Atlantean skill and their mastery of the materials of their world. The innermost wall was covered in orichalcum, a wall that glowed with a quiet, fierce light. The next wall was covered in tin, and the outermost wall was covered in brass, and all 3 of them shone in the sunlight with a quiet, brilliant radiance. These walls were not just for defense. They were a work of art, a symbol of the city's power and its beauty. They were a constant reminder of the divine origin of the city, a testament to the power of the gods and the ingenuity of their people. The canals were also a marvel of engineering. They were wide and deep, and they flowed with a constant, gentle pressure, a testament to the power of the great spring at the center of the island. The canals were a source of life, a constant flow of fresh water that nourished the land and the people. The water was used for irrigation, for drinking, for bathing, and for transport, and it was a source of great comfort and prosperity for the people of Atlantis. The bridges that spanned the canals were also a work of art, made of stone and adorned with carvings and sculptures. The bridges were not just for crossing. They were a place for people to gather, to talk, to watch the flow of the water and the movement of the boats. The buildings of the city were also a masterpiece of architectural harmony, a place where every building, every column, every wall was in perfect balance with every other. The buildings were adorned with sculptures and frescoes that depicted the stories of the gods and the history of their people. The streets were clean and well-maintained, and the gardens were filled with a profusion of exotic flowers and fragrant herbs. The city was a quiet, living work of art, a place where the people lived in harmony with their environment and with one another. The sound of water was a constant presence, a gentle lullaby that soothed the senses and calmed the mind. The air was clean and fresh, filled with a sense of the fertile soil and the blooming flowers. The people worked together, building a society that was based on mutual respect and shared prosperity. This was a time of profound beauty, a time of perfect balance, a time that would one day be lost to the depths of the sea, time that would one day become a haunting, beautiful memory, a whisper on the wind. With the foundational creation of the island complete, we now turn our gentle gaze to the society that flourished upon its fertile soil, to the people of Atlantis and their virtuous way of life in the early Golden Age. The Atlanteans, being the direct descendants of a god, were a people unlike any other. They were endowed with a quiet strength, a profound wisdom, and a deep-seated respect for the natural world and for one another. The 10 kings, the sons of Poseidon, ruled over their respective portions of the island with a gentle hand, and they were all guided by the same divine principles of justice, honor, and a shared love for their home. The laws of the kingdom were simple and just, inscribed on a great column of Aurica lemma at the very center of the city. These laws were a covenant with their divine ancestor, a promise to live in a way that was pleasing to the gods, a way that was in harmony with the cosmic order. The kings would meet every 5 or 6 years, in a cyclical rhythm that reflected the sacred nature of time, to perform a solemn ritual. They would gather in the great temple of Poseidon, and they would offer a sacrifice of a bull, a ritual that was meant to renew their covenant with their divine father. The ritual was a quiet and deeply spiritual event, a time for the kings to reconnect with their divine origins and to themselves to their sacred duty, to rule with wisdom and virtue. The society of Atlantis was built around the principle of the concentric rings, a design that was both a physical and a spiritual reflection of their way of life. The rings were not just a series of canals and walls. They were a social structure, a way of organizing the people and their lives. The people who lived in the innermost rings, closest to the royal acropolis, were the priests and the nobility, the keepers of the sacred knowledge and the protectors of the royal family. They lived a life of quiet, luxury, and scholarly pursuit, dedicating themselves to the study of the stars, the movements of the planets, and the ancient prophecies that guided their lives. The people in the outer rings were the artisans, the merchants, the farmers, and the laborers. They were a people of quiet diligence and immense skill, their hands shaping the very materials of their world into works of art and utility. The farmers toiled in the rich, fertile soil, and their fields were a source of unending bounty. The artisans worked with the orichalcum, the tin, and the brass, shaping them into works of beauty and function. The merchants sailed the great canal to the open sea, trading with other nations, but they did so with a sense of quiet fairness, never seeking to dominate or exploit others. The canals were a bustling artery of life, a constant flow of small boats and barges, their quiet movements a testament to the seamless efficiency of the Atlantean society. The city itself was a masterpiece of architectural harmony, a place where every building, every column, every wall was in perfect balance with every other. The buildings were adorned with sculptures and frescoes that depicted the stories of the gods and the history of their people. The streets were clean and well-maintained, and the gardens were filled with a profusion of exotic flowers and fragrant herbs. The sound of quiet conversation and the gentle lapping of water against the stone walls were the dominant sounds, a symphony of peace and contentment. The people of Atlantis, in these early days, were a people of profound innocence. They were not driven by a desire for wealth or power, but by a simple love for their home and a deep respect for their divine heritage. They were a people of quiet dignity and shared purpose, their lives guided by a moral compass that was as true as the stars in the night sky. Their wealth was not measured in gold or silver, but in the abundance of their land and the richness of their community. They were a people who understood the value of a shared meal, a quiet conversation, a moment of profound gratitude for the gifts that the gods had bestowed upon them. This golden age of Atlantis was a time of unparalleled peace and prosperity. The island was a self-sufficient paradise, a world unto itself, a place where the people lived in harmony with the earth, the sea, and the heavens. They were a people who understood that their true power lay not in military might or in material possessions, but in their quiet connection to the divine. This was a time of profound beauty, a time of perfect balance, a time that would one day be lost to the depths of the sea, time that would one day become a haunting, beautiful memory, a whisper on the wind. Our quiet journey now takes a somber turn, for the golden age of Atlantis, a time of unparalleled peace and prosperity, could not last forever. Like all things in the mortal world, it was subject to the quiet, inexorable march of time, and with the passage of time came a slow, insidious change. The Atlanteans, once a people of profound innocence and quiet dignity, began to lose their way. The purity of their divine heritage began to fade, a slow, imperceptible erosion of their moral compass. The human part of their nature, the part that was driven by ambition, greed, and a thirst for power, began to overshadow the divine part, the part that was guided by wisdom, justice, and a deep respect for the gods. The first sign of this change was a growing sense of discontentment. The people who had once been content with the simple, abundant gifts of their land began to desire more. They wanted more possessions, more luxury, more power. They began to compare themselves to one another, and in this comparison, a quiet envy and a subtle arrogance began to take root. They began to use their great wealth not for the betterment of their society, but for their own personal gain, a silent corruption that was spreading like a poison through the veins of their culture. The quiet, graceful architecture of the Golden Age began to be replaced by buildings that were more ostentatious and less harmonious. The temples and palaces were no longer built with a sense of quiet reverence, but with a sense of loud, boastful pride. They were built to impress, to show off the wealth and power of the city, not to honor the gods. The orichalcum, once a sacred metal used for adornment and ritual, became a symbol of wealth and status. It was used to decorate the homes of the rich, to create extravagant monuments to human ambition, a silent sacrilege that went unnoticed by most. The kings, once guided by a deep and abiding wisdom, began to lose their way. They began to see their power not as a sacred trust, but as a tool for personal gain and for the conquest of others. The meetings of the 10 kings, once a solemn ritual of renewal and recommitment to their divine heritage, began to become a forum for political maneuvering and a source of quiet conflict. They began to compete with one another, a subtle rivalry that was a stark contrast to the perfect harmony of the past. The people, who had once been a people of quiet diligence and shared purpose, began to become a people of quiet restlessness and individual ambition. The artisans began to create objects not for the beauty of their craft, but for the wealth they would bring. The merchants began to trade not with a sense of quiet fairness, but with a desire to dominate the markets and to exploit others. The society of Atlantis, once a perfect circle of harmony and abundance, began to fracture. The concentric rings, once a symbol of unity and shared purpose, began to become a social hierarchy, a silent division that separated the rich from the poor, the powerful from the powerless. The quiet dignity of the past began to be replaced by a loud, boastful arrogance. The Atlanteans began to see themselves as superior to other nations, as a people who were destined to rule the world. This hubris, a quiet yet powerful poison, was the ultimate sign of their corruption. They began to forget the divine principles that had once guided them, the principles of justice, honor, and a deep respect for the gods. They began to believe that their power and their wealth were their own doing, a product of their own genius, not a gift from the gods. This was a profound and dangerous change, a silent betrayal of their divine heritage. This slow descent into corruption was not a sudden event, but a gradual, quiet erosion of their moral compass. It was a process that was almost imperceptible at first, a process that was like the slow, steady drip of water that can eventually wear away a stone. But over time, the quiet erosion became a visible crack, a deep and undeniable fissure in the very foundation of their society. This was the beginning of the end, the quiet turning point that would lead to a great war, a great catastrophe, and the ultimate, profound silence of a lost world. Our quiet journey now takes us to the very pinnacle of the Atlantean civilization, to its golden age, a time of unparalleled peace, prosperity, and abundance. This was a time when the people of Atlantis lived in a state of perfect harmony with their world and with one another. A time when their hearts were filled with a quiet dignity and their minds were guided by a deep and abiding wisdom. Their wealth was not a source of arrogance or a tool for conquest, but a source of shared prosperity and a testament to the gifts that the gods had bestowed upon them. The land itself was a paradise, a fertile and bountiful world that produced a constant stream of food, a world that was nourished by the great spring at the center of the island. The fields were filled with a profusion of grains, fruits, and vegetables, and the people worked with a sense of quiet joy, their hands shaping the very earth into a source of life and nourishment. The artisans worked with the orichalcum, the tin, and the brass, shaping them into works of beauty and utility. They created not only grand monuments and works of public art, but also simple, elegant tools and objects for daily use, a testament to their belief that even the most mundane of objects could be a work of art. The city was a quiet, living masterpiece of architectural harmony, a place where every building, every column, every wall was in perfect balance with every other. The buildings were adorned with sculptures and frescoes that depicted the stories of the gods and the history of their people. The streets were clean and well-maintained, and the gardens were filled with a profusion of exotic flowers and fragrant herbs. The sound of quiet conversation and the gentle lapping of water against the stone walls were the dominant sounds, a symphony of peace and contentment. The people of Atlantis, in these golden days, were a people of profound innocence. They were not driven by a desire for material possessions or a thirst for power, but by a simple love for their home and a deep respect for their divine heritage. They were a people of quiet dignity and shared purpose, their lives guided by a moral compass that was as true as the stars in the night sky. Their wealth was not measured in gold or silver, but in the abundance of their land and the richness of their community. They were a people who understood the value of a shared meal, a quiet conversation, a moment of profound gratitude for the gifts that the gods had bestowed upon them. The 10 kings, the sons of Poseidon, ruled over their respective portions of the island with a gentle hand, and they were all guided by the same divine principles of justice, honor, and a shared love for their home. The laws of the kingdom were simple and just, inscribed on a great column of orichalcum at the very center of the city. These laws were a covenant with their divine ancestor, a promise to live in a way that was pleasing to the gods, a way that was in harmony with the cosmic order. The kings would meet every 5 or 6 years, in a cyclical rhythm that reflected the sacred nature of time, to perform a solemn ritual. They would gather in the great temple of Poseidon, and they would offer a sacrifice of a bull, a ritual that was meant to renew their covenant with their divine father. The ritual was a quiet and deeply spiritual event, a time for the kings to reconnect with their divine origins and to themselves to their sacred duty, to rule with wisdom and virtue. The society of Atlantis was built around the principle of the concentric rings, a design that was both a physical and a spiritual reflection of their way of life. The people who lived in the innermost rings, closest to the royal acropolis, were the priests and the nobility, the keepers of the sacred knowledge, and the protectors of the royal family. The people in the outer rings were the artisans, the merchants, the farmers, and the laborers. They were a people of quiet diligence and immense skill, their hands shaping the very materials of their world into works of art and utility. The farmers toiled in the rich, fertile soil, and their fields were a source of unending bounty. The artisans worked with the orichalcum, the tin, and the brass, shaping them into works of beauty and function. The merchants sailed the great canal to the open sea, trading with other nations, but they did so with a sense of quiet fairness, never seeking to dominate or exploit others. The canals were a bustling artery of life, a constant flow of small boats and barges, their quiet movements a testament to the seamless efficiency of the Atlantean society. This golden age of Atlantis was a time of unparalleled peace and prosperity. The island was a self-sufficient paradise, a world unto itself, a place where the people lived in harmony with the earth, the sea, and the heavens. They were a people who understood that their true power lay not in military might or in material possessions, but in their quiet connection to the divine. This was a time of profound beauty, a time of perfect balance, a time that would one day be lost to the depths of the sea, time that would one day become a haunting, beautiful memory, a whisper on the wind. the slow and insidious corruption of the Atlantean people, a process that began in the quiet depths of their hearts, eventually manifested itself in a profound and irreversible shift in their national identity. The Atlanteans, once a people of peaceful artisans and merchants, began to transform into a militaristic, imperialistic power, driven by a newfound thirst for conquest and a loud, boastful arrogance. The quiet, serene harmony of their golden age was replaced by the disciplined, rhythmic march of soldiers and the silent, imposing presence of a massive naval fleet. The wealth that had once been a source of shared prosperity became a tool of expansion and domination. The orichalcum, once a sacred metal used for adornment and ritual, was now used to build the armaments of war, a silent sacrilege that was now a source of great national pride. The ships that once sailed the Great Canal to trade with a sense of quiet fairness were now massive warships, their hulls bristling with weapons and their sails emblazoned with the symbols of a new, conquering empire. The kings, once guided by a deep and abiding wisdom, began to see their power not as a sacred trust, but as a tool for the conquest of other nations. They began to look beyond the vast expanse of the Atlantic, their eyes fixed on the shores of the Mediterranean, their minds filled with a sense of destiny and a hunger for a greater world. They began to build a powerful and disciplined army, an army that was as advanced in its tactics and its weaponry as their civilization was in its technology. The soldiers were not just common men, but a highly trained and well-equipped force, a force that was a testament to the Atlanteans' growing obsession with military might. They began to conquer the lands and the peoples that lay outside of their ocean, a slow and methodical expansion of their power and their influence. They went on to conquer parts of Africa, parts of Europe, and many of the islands that lay in the Mediterranean Sea. They established colonies and puppet states, imposing their laws and their will on the peoples they conquered. The Atlanteans, once a people of quiet dignity and shared purpose, were now a people of loud, boastful pride and a brutal, undeniable power. Their arrogance, a quiet yet powerful poison, was now a visible and audible presence in the world. They began to see themselves as superior to all other nations, a people who were destined to rule the world. They had forgotten the divine principles that had once guided them, the principles of justice, honor, and a deep respect for the gods. They had come to believe that their power and their wealth were their own doing, a product of their own genius, not a gift from the gods. This was a profound and dangerous change, a silent betrayal of their divine heritage. This shift to imperial power was a quiet turning point, a departure from the peaceful, virtuous path of the past. It was a process that was almost imperceptible at first, a process that was like the slow, steady buildup of tension before a great storm. But over time, the quiet buildup became a visible storm cloud, a deep and undeniable threat to the world. The world that had once seen Atlantis as a beacon of civilization and a source of quiet trade now saw it as a looming, dangerous force, a force that threatened to engulf the entire world in its ambition. The other nations of the world, once in awe of the Atlanteans' technological and architectural marvels, now saw them with a sense of fear and unease. They watched as the Atlantean Empire expanded, as its ships sailed across the seas, as its armies marched across the lands, and they knew that the world was on the brink of a great and terrible conflict. The Atlanteans, in their arrogance, did not see the danger. They were blinded by their ambition and their pride, deaf to the warnings that the gods and the natural world were sending them. This was the beginning of the end, the quiet turning point that would lead to a great war, a great catastrophe, and the ultimate, profound silence of a lost world. The Atlantean Empire, in its unchecked arrogance and insatiable thirst for power, had now become a great and terrible threat to the world. Their massive naval fleet, a silent and imposing force, sailed the seas. Their armies marched across the lands, and their will was imposed on all who dared to resist. The nations of the world, once peaceful and independent, were now either subjugated to Atlantean rule or living in a state of quiet fear, their freedom and their dignity under constant threat. But there was one nation, a small, humble city-state in the Mediterranean, that refused to bow to the Atlantean might. This was ancient Athens, a city-state that, in that distant, mythological time, was a beacon of freedom, wisdom, and virtue. The Athenians were not a people of great wealth or military power, but they were a people of quiet courage and a fierce love for their independence. They were a people who understood the value of freedom and the importance of a just and moral society. They saw the Atlantean Empire for what it was, a corrupt and arrogant force that was a direct threat to their way of life and to the freedom of the world. The Atlanteans, in their boundless pride, saw the Athenians as a minor inconvenience, a small, insignificant city-state that would be easily crushed. They did not see the quiet resolve of the Athenian people, a resolve that was as strong and as unyielding as the mountains that surrounded their city. The great conflict began, a war that pitted the massive, well-equipped Atlantean Empire against the small, but fiercely determined, city-state of Athens. The Atlantean fleet, a silent and imposing force, sailed toward the shores of Greece, their minds filled with a sense of inevitable victory. But they were met with a resistance they had not anticipated. The Athenians, led by their wise and courageous leaders, fought with a sense of quiet desperation and a profound love for their home. They fought not for power or for wealth, but for their freedom and for the freedom of the world. The war was a long and terrible conflict, a war that was fought on both land and sea, a war that was a testament to the quiet courage of the Athenian people. The Atlantean armies, so used to crushing all resistance, were met with a fierce and unyielding opposition. They were surprised by the ingenuity of the Athenian tactics, by their mastery of the land and their deep understanding of the sea. The Athenians, though outnumbered and outgunned, fought with a quiet fury that was a reflection of their profound love for their home. They were a people who had nothing to lose but their freedom, and they were willing to fight to the very end to protect it. The conflict was a global one, a war that saw the small but determined Athenian armies fighting to liberate the lands and the peoples that had been conquered by the Atlantean Empire. They inspired others to join their cause, to rise up against the tyranny of the Atlanteans. The tide of the war began to turn, a slow and quiet shift in the balance of power. The Atlantean Empire, once invincible, began to show cracks in its foundation. The arrogance and hubris that had fueled their conquest now began to be their undoing. The gods, who had long watched the slow descent of the Atlanteans, now began to see a glimmer of hope in the quiet courage of the Athenians. This was the final turning point, the last straw that would seal the fate of Atlantis. The gods, in their infinite wisdom and their deep sense of justice, decided that the Atlanteans had gone too far. They had become a corrupt and arrogant force that was a direct threat to the harmony and the balance of the world. They had forgotten their divine heritage. They had betrayed their sacred trust, and they had become a danger to all. The war with Athens was the final test, and the Atlanteans had failed. This was the quiet moment before the great storm, the last silent breath before the cataclysm that would wipe the arrogant empire from the face of the earth and send it to the bottom of the sea. The Atlantean Empire, in its moment of greatest triumph, stood on the brink of its ultimate and final collapse. The war with Athens, a conflict that had shaken the very foundations of the world, was a testament to the Atlanteans' boundless arrogance and their insatiable thirst for power. But it was also a sign that the time for judgment had arrived, that the patience of the gods had finally run out. The Atlanteans, in their hubris, had failed to see the quiet, subtle signs that the gods were sending them, signs that spoke of a coming storm, a profound and terrible reckoning. The first sign was a change in the weather, a quiet shift in the natural rhythm of the island. The gentle, predictable rains began to become more infrequent, and when they did come, they were torrential, violent downpours that caused great destruction. The great spring at the center of the island, a gift from the gods that had once flowed with a constant, gentle pressure, began to become more erratic. Its flow was either a slow, quiet trickle or a sudden, violent gush, a change that was a source of quiet confusion and unease for the people. The earth itself began to tremble, a quiet, low rumbling that was almost imperceptible at first. The tremors were not violent or destructive, but they were a constant, nagging presence, a subtle reminder that the ground beneath their feet was not as solid as they had once believed. The people, in their arrogance, ignored these signs. They attributed the changes in the weather to natural cycles, the changes in the spring to geological shifts, and the tremors to the natural instability of the earth. They were too preoccupied with their conquest, too consumed with their ambition and their pride, to see that they were receiving a warning from the very gods who had created them. The next sign was more ominous, more undeniable. The oracle, a source of ancient wisdom and divine prophecy, began to fall silent. The priests, who had once been able to commune with the gods, found that their prayers went unanswered, their rituals unheeded. The divine connection that had once been the very foundation of their society was now a tenuous, fading memory. The orichalcum, once a sacred metal that glowed with a gentle, fiery light, began to lose its luster. The glow faded, and the metal became dull and tarnished, a silent symbol of the Atlanteans' lost purity and their fading connection to the divine. This was a profound and deeply unsettling change, a change that could not be ignored. Some of the priests and the wise men of Atlantis, those who still held a glimmer of the ancient wisdom in their hearts, saw these signs for what they were, a clear and undeniable warning from the gods. They spoke of a coming storm, a great flood, a profound and terrible judgment that would wipe the corrupt empire from the face of the earth. But their quiet warnings were ignored by the kings and the people. The kings, blinded by their ambition and their pride, saw the warnings as a sign of weakness, a product of a fading superstition. The people, so consumed with their wealth and their desire for more, were deaf to the quiet voices of the wise. They were a people who had lost their connection to their divine heritage, a people who no longer believed in the power of the gods. The gods, in their infinite wisdom and their deep sense of justice, decided that the time for subtle warnings had passed. They had given the Atlanteans every opportunity to repent, to return to the virtuous path of the past, but the Atlanteans, in their boundless arrogance, had refused. The gods had watched as the Atlanteans went from a people of quiet dignity and shared purpose to a corrupt and arrogant force that was a direct threat to the harmony and the balance of the world. They had watched as the Atlanteans betrayed their sacred trust, and they had now reached a decision. The time for the final, great reckoning had come. The storm was no longer coming, it was already here. The time for divine judgment had come. The subtle warnings of the past, the quiet tremors and the silent pleas of the wise, had gone unheeded. The gods, in their infinite wisdom and their profound sense of justice, had made their final decision. The great island of Atlantis, a place of unparalleled beauty and prosperity, was now a place of profound and terrible reckoning. The first sign was not a tremor, but a shaking of the very air, a low, resonant groan that filled the sky and the sea. This was the sound of the earth itself, the sound of the world's very foundation beginning to fracture. Then the ground began to tremble, not with the quiet, nagging tremors of the past, but with a violent, terrifying force. The earthquakes came, one after another, each one more powerful than the last. The great temples and palaces, once so proud and so magnificent, began to sway and to groan, their columns cracking their walls, crumbling, their orichalcum shining for one last fleeting moment before being swallowed by the dust and the chaos. The people, in their terror, ran from their homes, their minds consumed with a profound and terrible fear. They had spent their lives in a state of quiet arrogance, but now, in their final moments, they were a people of quiet desperation, a people who were finally seeing the folly of their ways. But it was too late. The sea, once a source of life and nourishment, now rose up in a profound and terrifying rage. The waves came, a series of great tidal surges, waves that were more like liquid mountains, waves that crashed against the shining walls of the city with a power that was beyond human comprehension. The great canal, once a source of life and trade, now became a channel of profound and terrible destruction. A channel that funneled the angry waves directly into the heart of the city. A profound and terrible punishment for a people who had forgotten their divine heritage. The people of the outer rings were the first to be consumed. The tidal surges washed over their homes, their fields, their businesses. A great wave of destruction that wiped everything from the face of the earth. But the destruction did not stop there. The earthquakes were now constant, a low, violent rumble that filled the air. A sound that was the sound of the very world being torn apart. The land began to break, great chasms opening up in the ground, great fissures that swallowed up entire buildings, entire districts, entire sections of the city. The island, once a single, beautiful place, was now a fragmented, broken world, a world that was being consumed by the angry sea and the angry earth. The great central spring, the very source of life for the island, now erupted with a terrible force. A geyser of hot, boiling water and steam that was a final, violent sign of the gods' profound anger. The sound of the eruption was a profound and terrible roar, a roar that was the final, terrible sound of a lost world. The royal Acropolis, the very heart of the city, the place where the great temple of Poseidon stood, was the last to fall. The ground beneath it broke apart, and the great temples and palaces began to sink, a slow and terrible descent into the depths of the sea. The shining orichalcum, the brass, the tin, the white, black, and red stones all disappeared beneath the waves, a silent and permanent symbol of a lost paradise, a lost world, a lost legacy. The sky, once a brilliant blue, was now filled with a dark, terrifying storm. A great storm that was a reflection of the profound and terrible anger of the gods. The rain came not with a gentle, nourishing touch, but with a fierce, torrential downpour. A downpour that was a final, terrible punishment for a people who had forgotten their divine heritage. And then a profound and lasting silence descended. The earthquakes stopped, the floods receded, the storm clouds disappeared, and the great island of Atlantis was gone. Disappeared in a single day and a single night, sunk to the depths of the sea. A silent and permanent symbol of a great and terrible lesson. The world that was once filled with the sound of a great Aragon Empire was now filled with the profound and terrible silence of a lost world. A silence that speaks of a great and terrible lesson. A lesson that should not be forgotten. The great cataclysm had come and gone. The mighty island of Atlantis, a place of unparalleled beauty and prosperity, was now nothing more than a memory, a haunting whisper on the wind, a profound and terrible lesson for the ages. The sea, once a source of life and nourishment for the Atlanteans, was now their final, silent resting place, their endless, watery grave. The waves, which had once lapped gently against the shining walls of their city, now flowed over the ruins of their great temples and palaces, a silent and permanent reminder of a lost world. The air, which had once been filled with the sounds of a great, arrogant empire, was now filled with a profound and lasting silence, a silence that speaks of a great and terrible lesson. A lesson that should not be forgotten. But the story of Atlantis did not end with its sinking. It lived on, a memory that was handed down through the ages. A story that was told from generation to generation. A story that found its way to the great philosopher Plato, who recorded it for all time. The story of Atlantis is not a story of a place, but a story of a people, a story of their rise and their fall, of their virtues and their ultimate corruption. It is a story that speaks to the very heart of the human condition. A story that is a timeless and universal warning. The story of Atlantis teaches us a profound and terrible lesson. That a civilization, no matter how great its power, how vast its wealth, how advanced its technology, is ultimately fragile. It is a story that tells us that a civilization that forgets its moral compass, that loses its connection to the divine, that becomes consumed with ambition, pride, and a thirst for power, is a civilization that is doomed to fail. The Atlanteans, in their boundless arrogance, believed that they were a people who were destined to rule the world, a people who were beyond the reach of the gods and the natural world. They were a people who believed that their power and their wealth were their own doing, a product of their own genius, not a gift from the gods. This hubris, a quiet yet powerful poison, was their ultimate undoing. The story of Atlantis is a story of a lost paradise, a story of a world that was perfect in its beginning, but that was ultimately corrupted by the very people who lived in it. It is a story that reminds us that true power lies not in military might or in material possessions, but in a quiet dignity, a shared purpose, a deep respect for the natural world, and a profound connection to the divine. The Atlanteans, in their final moments, in their terror and their desperation, learned this lesson. They learned that the gods were real, that their power was infinite, and that their judgment was a profound and terrible force. But it was too late. The great island of Atlantis was now nothing more than a memory, a haunting whisper on the wind, a profound and terrible lesson for the ages. And so, the story of Atlantis has lived on, a story that has been told and retold, a story that has been the source of countless books, films, and theories. It is a story that has captured the imagination of the world for millennia, a story that has inspired some to seek for the lost island to find the ruins of a great civilization that was lost to the depths of the sea. But the true legacy of Atlantis is not in its physical location. Its true legacy is in its story, in the profound and timeless lesson that it teaches us. The story of Atlantis is a reminder that we are all on a journey that is filled with both beauty and danger, a journey that can either lead to a golden age of peace and prosperity, or to a dark age of corruption and destruction. The choice is ours to make. The story of Atlantis is a quiet, yet powerful voice from the distant past, a voice that speaks to us of a great and terrible lesson, a lesson that should not be forgotten. And so, as we end our quiet journey, we are left with a feeling of profound sadness, a feeling of deep and quiet sorrow for a lost world, for a lost civilization, for a lost people. We are left with the silence of the sea, a silence that holds the secrets of a great and terrible lesson, a silence that will live on forever.